Now, there are some of you out there who are going to take this with a grain of salt if the comments on my Ugliest Gundam video are any indication, but heat is heat, I guess. This also brings into question, though, what does make a good mech design? Well, I can make a few suggestions at least, as far as what sort of things stand the test of time, so join me on this little excursion as we take a crack at some of the cues that mech designers have taken over the years. So the first thing that a budding mecha designer should consider is, what is the purpose of the mech in question? Is it a construction or urban use mecha? Is it a super robot designed to inspire hope in a downtrodden people? Is it designed for the water or outer space instead of the land? Can it do just a little bit of everything? Machines do tend to be purpose-built and not particularly for aesthetics if they're working models, so clunky, heavy construction mecha are perfectly reasonable and even encouraged. The heroic, quote-unquote, version of these machines should probably bear the hallmarks of their origins, even after you gussy it up and make it suitably appealing. A super robot should look like a knight in shining armor, a superhero, or have a very specific and almost garish motif behind it, be it an animal theme or a certain type of real-world vehicle or something alien or whatever floats your boat for that particular motif. Super robots live and die on their gimmick, after all, and their ability to sell toys to small children. Super Sentai, for example. Follow that and you can't really go wrong. But more on that specifically later. If you're making something to work in the water, fins, propellers, things that resemble scuba gear are all encouraged, and blues, greens, and grays are probably a good start for a color scheme. If it's primarily spaceborne, well, you can go nuts. Legs, no legs, who's to say? Purple, pink, black, white, go nuts. But you should probably put as many thrusters as you can on it without sacrificing things like general shape and usefulness. Now, it does dawn on me that the best possible mechanical design for anything going in space is a ball, but nobody wants to pilot the heroic ball, unless they're Shiro Amada, and people don't buy action figures of balls unless they're packaged with a GM, so you kind of have to make some allowances for, well, let's face it, mecha are ridiculous. But, we know that already. That brings me to my next point, though. A recognizable shape is a must. Mech designs lately are a little bit unremarkable in shows like Code Geass and Fullmetal Panic, where they have discernible anatomy, but they don't really stand out. Now, it doesn't mean they're bad, it's just they're a little underwhelming outside the context of the show. The context of the show is indubitably more important than this, but for those of us who want to look at mecha kind of in a vacuum, it kind of doesn't excite the blood. Walking a fine line between recognizability and functioning in context is something that really only experience will bring out, but do try to keep it in the back of your mind. If someone is looking at your mecha from a distance, they should be able to pick out something resembling a silhouette. To adapt a phrase from Games Workshop, 3 distinct features from 15 feet away should be your mantra. They don't have to be wild and crazy, but they should have something specific other than coloration to them. The head fin and the open neck cockpit that the AV-98 sports are a prime example of this, as well as the police lights on his shoulders. The V-fin, the beam saber sockets, and the red chin on the original Gundam are also what you're looking to emulate. On the super robot end, you can immediately tell when something is a Mazinger or a Getter by their head shape and their chest armament, for example. That is something that needs to stand out immediately. Now, of course, these are good suggestions for any design, really, but generally speaking, what's good for character designs is also good for mecha. Some things to avoid. Big backpacks are fine, but they need to have purpose. Wings, thrusters, weapons packages, something along those lines, but overloaded backpacks are probably not ideal. Try not to be too extra unless you really have earned it. Angel wings may be a bit much for the first outing, I'm just saying. Backpacks do add to the overall silhouette, so that can be an easy check mark, but don't go too crazy on that. That brings me to coloration next. Primary colors are your go-to. Red, blue, yellow, white, black. They are going to be your bread and butter for the heroes with variants in between. Generally speaking, you should try to break up the primary color with neutral color highlighting. If this sounds like a no-brainer to you, then congrats, you're ahead of the curve. You want to reserve green for grunt units, and purple reads most readily as royal, so use sparingly. Orange is kind of a weird one because it could read either as engine or it could read as hazard. but either way, it doesn't have a lot of use outside of construction as a primary color, similar to bright yellow. Having a machine that is almost entirely white is a delicate balancing act because the human eye wants that breakup of parts to sort of keep what's what straight. These are not hard and fast rules, but cultural considerations. If you can make it work in spite of this, then be my guest. Next to figure out is theme. Most of the time, Super Sentai has a pretty good handle on this sort of thing, so take a couple of cues from it. Now, it's possible to go overboard with the theming as well, and Super Sentai does that as well. Voltron, or Go Line, depending on your current geographic location, is a pretty good example of how to integrate a theme without going too far. The lion theming is all there, but it doesn't overwhelm the design, but you can never quite get away from it. Conversely, the design for Combattler V is actually pretty poor at showing its theme, but the idea behind that one was for more of a build this in real life concept. That was a calculated risk that did pay off. And then, of course, you can get stuff that just makes you say chill the fuck out, like Go Onger and Bokenger's ultimate forms. I mean, geez, look at this. The poor suit actor can barely move. At any rate, let's look at a couple of examples of Western mecha to consider that also follow these rules in the way that I think is proper. The bot from Robot Jocks, for example, has a very specific, if hunched over body shape. Check 1. It's white with red highlights. Check 2. And there's no mistaking that silhouette for anything but a big smashy crushy set of weapons on a big stampy robot. It stands out pretty well. The Imperial Knights from Warhammer 40,000 also have a very distinctive body shape, and while coloration is up to the player, the provided examples have very specific and very bold color schemes. On top of all that, weaponry is immediately recognizable as a big hulking menace of a machine. Battletech, Exo Squad, both follow these rules to produce memorable, if perhaps not always the prettiest, mecha in Western imagination. One of those properties has Shoji Kawamori to thank for some of those designs, eh? Still, the design philosophies will help people get what the mech is all about. At a glance, if it's good or evil, hero or grunt, completely neutral, what its purpose is it a long-range weapon? Is it a close-range knife fighter sort of thing? That sort of thing is not just important for casual fans, but also for people who want to make art or build models of said design. So here's a couple that I've made for myself for reference. With this first one, the hard case, it has a distinctive visor, specific backpack and the head fin, as well as a strong color scheme of blue and white, with little red highlights. So at a glance, that checks off the list almost immediately. The backpack marks it out as a high mobility or specifically spaceborne mecha. There you have it. Simple, clean. Could be anyone's, really. By contrast, the mecha it fights against, the Longstriders, also have that design element of a frilled face, a very distinctive visor, a flaring chest plate, and sport a rather ghastly yellow color. This is not heroic, but it could be remodeled just a little bit into the enemy leader's mecha. And here's this final one that's a work in progress. This one is supposed to take cues from World War I trench fighters. It's grungy, it's a little hunched over, it carries essentially a giant 1886 lever-action rifle. This one was imparted to me by a commenter who clearly knows more about guns than I do, because gas blowback, which is how most modern firearms work, apparently that doesn't scale particularly well. But again, distinctive helmet, wide proportions, the chest and grill all stand out. This is a very distinctive, visually arresting mecha. Now, whether or not you like it or not is a whole other story, but the underlying principles are there. Personal taste will ultimately be the deciding factor in whether or not a mech is pretty or not, but hopefully this should give you a couple ideas as how to make some good headway into mechanical design. So, good luck, have fun. That being said, this is Professor Otaku, the greatest American anime critic, signing off.